Hey guys, Brian Rauf here with Chat Sports, welcoming you in to another edition of the Rauf Report, where we're going to cover the latest news and rumors and general happenings from the past week of college basketball. We're going to start off with a report that broke late last night from ESPN on the latest on the FBI investigation. According to this report from ESPN, about 36 NCAA programs are expected to be affected by the current FBI probe and receive some sort of NCAA penalties for recruiting violations. Now, this is based on information that was gathered in wiretap conversations and emails and cell phone record seized from NBA agent Andy Miller, who was one of the 10 men arrested when the news broke of the investigation initially, way back in the fall. This shouldn't come as a huge surprise. A number of schools were indicated in the scope originally, including Auburn and USC and Arizona, Louisville especially, if you remember. It wasn't going to be just restricted to those schools. I think we're starting to see now more information about to leak out about what other schools were involved. This was a systematic problem in all of college basketball. This wasn't just limited to a certain number of schools or a certain number of Adidas schools or only Adidas schools. This was a systematic problem for all shoe companies and all schools dealing with some shady aspects of recruiting and corruption and money that may or may not have changed hands. I'll be interested to see what type of penalties are handed down, but it should come as no surprise that it's something on this scope and that so many schools are going to be affected. In the ESPN report also, it mentioned that all of these schools are going to be high major and big time programs as opposed to any mid-major schools, because those big time programs are the ones that are going after those big time recruits, which again shouldn't come as any surprise. If you're a fan of a mid-major, you should feel pretty well. And if you're a fan of a high major team, you probably assume that your team was wrapped up in this in some sort of way. Adidas schools especially, since we already have information about them, but I think we're going to see Nike schools, Adidas schools, big name schools in every major conference wrapped up in this in some form or fashion. It'll be interesting to see what comes out and what kind of punishments the NCAA deals or hands down in these cases. Now there are some coaches that are potentially tied into this, or whose programs have been tied into this, that face some questions about their future with their programs. Bruce Pearl at Auburn was almost fired before the season started for his unwillingness to cooperate with Auburn's investigation. USC and Andy Enfield and Arizona and Sean Miller were also wrapped up in this, and there are questions about the status of those coaches and their jobs moving forward. And as we're seeing this year, the coaching carousel is starting to turn as we head towards the offseason as well. Those three are certainly worried about their jobs, but a number of other coaches, due to poor on-court performance as well, are having to worry about the status of their jobs and are on the hot seat coming down the last few weeks of the regular season here. It was announced this week that Andy Kennedy, the head coach at Ole Miss, will not be back with the Rebels next season after 12 years with the program, which is understandable, but Kennedy is a good coach. He was part of you could say, the most consistently successful era at Ole Miss. He was 245 and 150 in those 12 seasons, but only made 2 NCAA tournament appearances, never reached a Sweet 16, and had double-digit losses in all but one season. Again, at a school like Ole Miss, who's not basketball heavy and doesn't put a lot of emphasis and resources into their basketball program, that's a pretty good run. But at the same time, they're 500 on the year. They're one of the worst teams in the SEC. They're not great. They haven't had the top-end success you would want to hang around, stay with a coach who goes through something like that. So I think this was a decision by Ole Miss. They decided they needed to go in a different direction. I don't know if they're going to be able to duplicate what Kennedy has done at that school. I think he's a tremendous coach and will hopefully end up on his feet at a different job somewhere else. But this is a tough situation in Ole Miss. I think it was smart for them. They simply needed a change, whether for better or worse. This had simply run its course, and they were staying at mediocrity, which they decided they were no longer okay with. Now, Ole Miss is not going to be the only opening this offseason. There's expected openings at UConn and Pitt. Louisville already has an opening. Dave Padgett's the interim head coach there, who took over for Rick Pitino, who was fired after the FBI scandal. But again, he's at the interim role. He will only be a candidate for the permanent role. They haven't given it to him yet. And Georgia, Mark Fox has entered the season on a hot seat. Unless they somehow make the NCAA tournament, they're expected to fire him as well. So those are 4 major openings really, with Georgia, Louisville, Pitt, and UConn. And all of them are high-profile programs, but also programs that face major questions. Pitt has really fallen off in the Kevin Stallings era. Kevin Ollie has been very average. His record's about 500 since winning that national championship at UConn. Which I want to ask us, we're bringing a reaction poll here. Is UConn still one of the premier jobs in college basketball? They've already won 2 NCAA championships this decade. They won the championship in 2011 with Kemba Walker, won it in 2014 with Ollie as the head coach, with Shabazz Napier leading the way. But the switch to the American Athletic Conference seems to have hurt them, and Kevin Ollie not doing a great job developing players. They've been fine on the recruiting trail, but they haven't had any development, particularly offensively, has really hurt them. So I want to ask you, is this still one of the premier jobs in the country? Let us know with your reactions what your thoughts on that are. I think it'll still be a job that sees a high-profile hire come in because of the prestige of UConn and everything that program has been. But again, I do think a lot of the shine on the program has diminished because of the recent lack of success and the conference that they now play in. We'll switch gears now and go to some top NBA draft prospects. We're going to look at Trae Young specifically. There's been some questions as to whether he would actually go to the NBA draft after this freshman season, which has been incredible. He's still leading the country in both points and assists, even though he's struggled of late as Oklahoma has sort of faltered in the very tough Big 12 play, obviously. But LeBron James was asked about what Trae Young should do, and LeBron kind of scoffed it off and said Trae Young better go pro, saying, "What decision? It's not really a decision. It's like waking up this morning. It's not a decision," which I would agree. I don't know why there's this pushback against Young needing to stay in school to polish his skills or whatever the critics are saying to point out his lack of sustained success. It's important to remember still, his worst games this year are him scoring like 19 points and dishing out 7 assists. For other people, that's a career game, one of the best games of the season, but for him, and the high bar he set, it's impossible to continue to reach that high bar, especially as the level of competition improves. He's still projected to be a top 10 pick. He'll probably go somewhere in the 7, 8, or 9 range after the really elite prospects go. But his quickness, shooting ability, vision, he's going to be a top 10 pick. Oklahoma fans, I know you want to hold out hope that maybe he'll be back, but he won't be back. He's going pro. Another guy who's definitely going to go pro, I would say, is Michael Porter Jr. at Missouri, who had been out since the first game of the season. He had supposed to miss the entire season with a hip injury that ended up requiring back surgery. He only played 2 minutes in the opener before sitting out. He was supposed to be lost for the season. Well, he created a bit of a buzz this week when he told reporters that there's a good chance he plays this season by the end. He's hoping to return for the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, giving Missouri a boost in those games. However, head coach Quanzo Martin is slowing the hype train down a little bit on that front, saying it's not an issue for the team or any of the staff. It's something that's a training staff issue right now, and isn't something the team is worried about until Porter gets clearance, which again, he has not been cleared yet and doesn't seem to be heading that direction in the next week or two. So this is going to be something that we keep an eye on for sure the next couple weeks. Porter's projected to be a top 5 or 6 pick before the injury. He was in the conversation for the number 1 overall pick and could still very well be if he comes back and checks out healthy. NBA doctors are okay with his recovery from the injury. If he comes back, Missouri becomes a very different team, and a team that suddenly becomes dangerous in both the SEC tournament and winning the SEC tournament, a league where there's no real top-tier elite teams. And then in the NCAA tournament, they've done a tremendous job this year without him. He was a big reason why many thought they were a sleeper team in the SEC and in the country to make a Final Four run. They've proven to be better without him than I think a lot of people thought. So him coming back in the mold, obviously, once they adjust to playing together again, will help this team and make them dangerous, potentially a second weekend team if the bracket falls the right way for them. Marvin Bagley III is another top pick, going to be a top pick. He's going to be a top 3 or 4 selection. He is also dealing with an injury. He has missed the last 2 games with a mild knee sprain that he suffered in the first half in the loss to UNC. This is something for me to keep an eye on. It seems minor. He's sat out these 2 games for rest, according to Duke. They haven't wanted to put too much strain on him and overbear him and want to keep him fresh for March, which is understandable. Also want to keep him fresh for the NBA and not have him dealing with any injuries as it goes into the NBA draft process for teams, which is understandable. But at the same time, this is an injury that we've seen linger with several other players over the past few years, that these sort of seemingly minor injuries that the team sort of downplays carry on, and suddenly they're missing significant chunks of time. Bagley was only expected to miss a Georgia Tech game last weekend, a couple days after the UNC game, so it made sense. This week against Virginia Tech, sat him out again. Now eyebrows are starting to be raised as to just how serious is this injury. Will he be back this weekend? Will he be back next week? What's his timeline? Duke continues to say he's day-to-day and that it's not serious, but it's something to definitely keep an eye on. Now, Duke has won both games with them and beat Georgia Tech handily, beat Virginia Tech handily. Grayson Allen's improved play in those games has certainly helped, but if Duke is going to make a long run in the NCAA tournament, they need to have Marvin Bagley available, need to have him healthy, which again I think is the goal of this. But again, we need to watch and pay close attention to this injury and see just how long it lingers. We're going to bring in another reaction poll now. Is Duke a legitimate national title contender? We know they have their defensive problems. We know that they're inconsistent at times, especially with Grayson Allen, who was averaging under 10 points per game in ACC play up until this past week without Bagley. You know how Bagley's injury to deal with. Wendell Carter has played well for them, but the other freshman, Gary Trent Jr., has been inconsistent. Trayvon Duval has now been in and out of the starting lineup the past week, as Coach K told you that, to try and figure out something that works best for them. So, is Duke a legitimate national title contender? Let us know in the reactions what your thoughts are, and give us a comment or two to let us know your thoughts on Duke and what you think their chances are of making a long run in the NCAA tournament this year. Kentucky is another team that had hopes of making a long run in the NCAA tournament a few weeks ago, but everything's simply fallen off for them of late. But the big news for them this week is that they're going to be in a 10-episode docuseries on Facebook Watch called Inside the Madness, University of Kentucky Basketball. The first episode of that is going to air on Facebook this Saturday, and it's going to be following the team on and off the court throughout the entire season. So the episode on Saturday will probably look at the beginning of the season and maybe some practices leading into the season opener type thing. But this is a team that it's interesting to watch. They're a team that's the youngest team in the country, a ton of freshmen, none of the real top prospects we've seen Kentucky have in the years past, but there's still plenty of talent. And we've seen on the sidelines this season how frustrated John Calipari has been at times trying to deal with this young group and get them to play at the level he wants. So it's going to be very interesting, I think, for me and college basketball fans to see the day-to-day interactions between him and this team and how they're responding to him and sort of the day-to-day in and outs of Kentucky, but also just a general college basketball program. That's something that's going to be new access. It's going to be fun for everybody to watch and see, and being on Facebook, it'll be free. It'll be, I think, a lot of fun to watch. Now, the more serious on-court matter with this Kentucky team. Do they have to worry about their NCAA tournament chances? They've lost 4 games in a row. They're currently projected to be a 9 seed, according to ESPN Joe Lunardi. And if they keep losing like this, that seed is going to keep dropping, and so they're going to find themselves closer and closer to the bubble. They're only 2-6 against quadrant run teams, which is not good. We've seen Michigan State be held off the 1 line because of and even the 2 line in the early release last weekend because of a similar quadrant 1 record, only 2 wins for Michigan State at the time. So this is something to watch. Kentucky certainly has chances to improve that resume as they finish out the season here. They finished the season with a road game at Florida, which a win would really, really help them, I think, more than any other game. And then go in the SEC tournament where other chances for big games and big wins will present themselves. But if you're a Kentucky fan, I don't think you need to worry about making the NCAA tournament. I think you're in, even if you continue to struggle here, as long as you pick up another win or two, especially that Florida win, you're in and you don't have to worry about it. But considering they've lost 4 games in a row, this is something to definitely keep an eye on with Kentucky. If their struggles continue and bubble teams continue to win, Kentucky's sort of sliding into that bubble conversation. One team who doesn't have to worry about being on the bubble is Villanova, who's pretty much shored up a 1 seed in this year's tournament. And they got a big boost for next season as well yesterday when 5-star point guard Javon Quinterly committed to Villanova. He had decommitted from Arizona following the FBI fallout in the fall. He was one of the top players still available on the board, top 25 overall player, number 5 point guard in the country, according to the 247 Sports Composite. This is a big get for Villanova. Jalen Brunson probably won't be back next year. Jonathan DiVincenzo has played some point guard for them, but he's better at the off-guard spot, and they need to find an answer at point guard for them next year. Quinterly looks like he'll step into that role, and this is something new for Villanova. They haven't really gotten these top-tier, high-end, potential one-and-done recruits in the past. So the fact that, one, they're willing to do it for Quinterly shows head coach Jay Wright's thoughts about him and what he can bring to the team. And number 2, they obviously don't think he's involved in any of the FBI fallout that happened there in Arizona. They seem to think he's clean and he'll be a major addition to the program, which he will be, and for them are hoping will keep them at the top of the Big East for the next couple of years, or at least next year. We'll bring in our final reaction poll here for the day. Villanova, they have lost 2 of the last 3 games. They're struggling a little bit, but are they the best team in college basketball? Give us your reactions below. In my opinion, when Villanova is healthy, remember, they don't have Phil Booth, who's starting guard right now due to a broken hand. His timeline for return is still up in the air. They don't know if he'll be back for the Big East tournament, the NCAA tournament, what have you. When they're healthy, I think they're easily the best team in the country, although Virginia can give them a push. Xavier, who they played this weekend, has certainly played better of late and could challenge them as the best team in the Big East. But when healthy, I think they're the best team in college basketball. Do you think they're the best team in college basketball? Let us know with your reactions. Give us a comment on your thoughts on Villanova. Let us know what you think. Mention that Villanova-Xavier game for this weekend. That highlights what's going to be a big weekend across the world in college basketball. This game, battle of top 4 teams. Xavier is at home. This is their best chance to beat Villanova and end Villanova's streak at the top of the Big East. The Wildcats have won the Big East 4 years in a row. Should Xavier win, they would have a 2-game lead over Villanova in the standings with only 3 games left to play, which essentially means unless they happen to lose their last 3 games, they would essentially clinch the Big East championship, which would be huge for that program. It's trying to make their a Final Four and trying to solidify themselves as one of the best teams in the country. They'll have the big stage to themselves at 4:30 on Fox on Saturday. They win that game. I think they jump into the top 3, maybe even top 2, below Virginia. I would take Xavier over Michigan State on neutral court right now. I think they're playing better. Trayvon Blewett is playing great. The rest of the team, great defensively, one of the better offensive teams in the country as well. This is their chance to make a statement and prove themselves to be one of the elite teams in the country, and I think they'll take it. I think they'll win. But as we've seen with Villanova, they haven't. This is the games they've won in the past. They're not easy to relinquish their throne at the top of the Big East. So this will be the game to watch of the weekend. Another game that's got major implication on a conference title race is West Virginia at Kansas in the Big 12. These teams are 2nd and 3rd in the Big 12 behind Texas Tech, and this is a big game. Texas Tech only has 3 losses in conference. Kansas has 4. West Virginia has 5. If West Virginia loses this game, they have 6, and they're out of the conference title race. Should Kansas lose at home, a place they've already lost 3 times this year, they would have 5 losses, and suddenly Texas Tech would have a 2-game lead in the Big 12 with only 2 weeks remaining. Kansas has won the Big 12 13 years in a row, as we all know. So this game, should West Virginia win, would essentially signal the end of that era for the Jayhawks unless Texas Tech falls apart down the stretch here. So this is a big game for the Big 12 and for college basketball history in general. UCLA in the Pac-12 in the John Wooden era, it wasn't the Pac-12 then, but in the John Wooden era, won 13 consecutive conference titles, and that was the record that Kansas tied last year. Should Kansas win the Big 12 again this year, or at least share the regular season title with, I'm assuming, Texas Tech, it would set the NCAA record for the longest streak of consecutive conference championships. So this is something to really watch and could play major implications, obviously, in the Big 12 race for the rest of the season. And then I think the most underrated game of the weekend on Sunday, big game for both schools involved, Wichita State at Cincinnati. This is a game that we've been looking forward to ever since Wichita State announced they were going over into the American Athletic Conference this offseason. Clearly the top 2 teams in the conference. Cincinnati has risen to number 5 in the AP poll with an undefeated record in the American. Although they haven't really faced stiff competition. They'll face Houston later tonight, which is probably the toughest team they've faced so far. They were down 18 points at home to Houston in the last game before coming back and winning that game by double digits in the second half. Wichita State has struggled a bit in the new conference. They're 9-3. They've really faltered, especially of late. Their defense hasn't been where it normally is, but it's still one of the better offensive teams in the country as well. This is a great measuring stick game for both teams as they head into as we get down to the stretch in February and head into March. Wichita State needs a marquee win to sort of put themselves back in the top tier mix among teams in the country. They've fallen number 19 in the AP poll. They had fallen out of our power rankings at Chat Sports for the past couple of weeks simply because of those bad losses they had in the American with their 9-3 record. They need this win to put themselves back where they were, or start putting themselves back where they were in the preseason as a top 5, top 10 team. I don't think they're that team unless they start playing better defense, but that starts with this game against Cincinnati, who has the 2nd best defense in the country behind Virginia. It will certainly test Wichita State's offense, and for Cincinnati, it will give them a test as to if their offense is good enough to compete against top-tier teams and the teams they hope to face later on in the NCAA tournament as they hope come with them making a long run. All right, guys, that's it for this week's Rauf Report. I am Brian Rauf with Chat Sports. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Rauf33. Make sure you enjoy all the basketball games tonight and a stellar slate of games this weekend. We'll talk to you next week.